Thanks for joining us today for this special Homes for Cathy workshop on housing solutions to migrant homelessness, and particularly looking at partnership approaches. It's great to see some familiar Homes for Cathy faces, but also some new faces, as I said, from charities and other organisations that are keen to work in partnership to find ways to end migrant homelessness. If you can mute microphones, I think most people have, but just a little reminder in case anyone hasn't, and then you can unmute when you need to if you want to ask questions at the end. So for those who don't know me, my name is Vicky McDonald, and I work for, I do the day-to-day running of the Homes for Cathy campaign. So I work at Hightown Housing Association, and we're based in Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire. And Hightown is one of the founding members of the Homes for Cathy group. So our CEO sits on the board. We've got a board of about 5 or 6 people, and yeah, I do the day-to-day running, so I organise workshops like this, and the idea is really behind the workshops is to share best practice around our 9 commitments to end homelessness. And for those who don't know about the 9 commitments, most of you probably do, they are pledges, aspirational pledges that our members sign up to that were developed with Crisis, the homelessness charity, and they're around policies and practices and provision that housing associations can aspire to put in place in order to end homelessness. So if you want to look at those, then you can look on our website under commitments. But this workshop today focuses particularly on commitment 8, which is possibly one of the more challenging commitments, and it is to contribute to ending migrant homelessness in the areas that housing associations operate. So probably people will concur that it's quite a challenging commitment, and it's a complex subject matter, because depending on a person's immigration status, they may have no recourse to public funds, as I'm sure probably a lot of you are more expert in this subject than I am. They may not be able to access housing benefits or housing assistance. So for the purposes of today, because it's such a big area, and I know organisations who are Homes for Cathy members are doing things in areas such as provision, supported housing for minors, unaccompanied asylum-seeking minors, but obviously we get, local authorities have a duty of care to those. But this subject, this workshop in particular, is going to focus on people with no recourse to public funds, which means they're not eligible, basically. So as I said, we know that the whole subject matter of migrant homelessness has been in the spotlight recently with the end of Everyone In. I did look up some statistics which said on the 15,000 people brought into temporary accommodation during the height of the pandemic, between 4,000 and 6,000 have NRPF. So with Everyone In coming to an end, there's a lot of uncertainty over what's going to happen to those people and whether they'll be returning to rough sleeping, unfortunately. So we know it's a challenging area, but we know that there are ways that housing associations can play their part in helping this particular group, which leads me on to our speakers today. So first up, we have Paul Catterall and Cathy Fawcett, who are both network development workers with the charity NACCOM, the No Accommodation Network, and they're going to talk about why people who come to the UK can find themselves in a situation with no recourse to public funds, NRPF, and a few examples of the plethora of schemes that they facilitate to offer this group accommodation and support. And next, we are attempting to show a short film via Facebook, so of one of the lived experience, a person with lived experience that is supported by Assist, who we're also going to hear from as they are working on a project with Homes for Cathy member South Yorkshire Housing Association. So Phil Parks, the head of service at SYHA, and assists Oliver Chamberlain and Jochen Kortlender, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, are going to talk about that project. And then we're going to have a short break, 5 minutes, and then just admitting people. And then we're going to hear from the Oxfordshire Homelessness Movement, who have got a NRPF scheme, and they're working with partners, including Soha, one of our members, Housing Association members, and Connection Support, which is a charity specialising in the area of migrant homelessness, who provide the support element. So we're going to hear from Eva Brown from Connection Support and Jude McCaffrey, who is from Soha Housing. And so the plan is to wrap up at about 12:30, but you are very welcome to stay on. I know that people are busy, so what we've done is make it optional to stay on, and some of our guest speakers are going to hang around and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to now introduce Paul Cattrall and Cathy Fawcett from Nacom, who are going to talk about what they do.
Hi, thanks Vicky. Share my screen. Okay. Brilliant. So hi, my name's Kate Fawcett and I'm joined with my colleague Paul Cattrall, and we are network development workers for Nacom, the No Accommodation Network. The No Accommodation Network is a very diverse network of members. There is 140 members altogether, and these are all charities, projects, housing associations and individuals. They're all seeking to end the destitution. Our vision really is a commitment to bringing an end to destitution amongst people seeking asylum, refugees, migrants, all with a no recourse to public funds condition living here in the UK. And what our mission is about promoting best practice in and supporting the establishment of accommodation projects that reduce destitution amongst this people group. Hopefully, move on. Over to Paul.
Okay, so NACCOM members provide accommodation to those left with NRPF and other migrants at risk of homelessness. And our aim today is to show how the provision of property and other services by housing associations to support this work would meet the Homes for Cathy commitment number 8 of contributing to ending migrant homelessness. So just a bit about our members. We're currently 140 members, 70 of which provide accommodation and 40 of which provide housing. And 17 of those members that are providing housing are working with 21 housing associations, 7 of which are Homes for Cathy members. And that equates to roughly 12.2% of our housing stock within the network. Our members are at the core of NACCOM is addressing the homelessness of people with NRPF conditions. And what's interesting is that over the past year, 56% of those housed had NRPF conditions, and 84% of those who moved on from that achieved positive outcomes. And we'll be talking a bit more about that later in the examples. So we're a very diverse network. We range from charities with a single house right up to a couple of housing associations that are also members. So back to Katie.
Thank you. So the question is, why do people become destitute and have the no recourse to public funds condition set to them? And this is often referred as NRPF. If there are any acronyms that we use today that we don't describe, please do put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to explain what they are. So the no recourse condition means that somebody is ineligible of local authority homelessness assistance or any means tested welfare benefits. And there's various ways in which people who have come to the UK find themselves without recourse to public funds and therefore in need of accommodation and support. Predominantly and at the heart of our membership, the group of people our members most often work with are the people who are seeking asylum and have had their asylum claims refused and have since exhausted all their rights of appeal, often referred to as ARE. So why does someone become appeals rights exhausted in the first place? Well, quite a lot of people lack evidence to prove their asylum claim. As you can imagine, and as many people saw a few weeks ago, people flee in Afghanistan. This is not something that is often planned. This is often something that is done at the spur of the moment. It's had to be done in an emergency situation, and it's very hard to collect evidence as to the people that are persecuting you. And it's impossible to kind of present those situations in the way that the Home Office believe you should. A lot of people also suffer from PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, and this can lead to a lot of inconsistencies when people are explaining their situations and what they've suffered, and this can often have issues around the credibility of their asylum claim. There's also a great deal of poor legal representation. Solicitors only get £413 as a fixed fee from the legal aid agency for asylum claims up until the initial decision. So this equates to around 8 hours of work. And if they go over this, it's then kind of working pro bono. So you can imagine 8 hours is not a lot to prepare a substantial asylum claim that will give some kind of merit to getting a positive decision. And sadly, which is a kind of high percentage of things, decisions are due to, negative decisions are due to poor Home Office decision making. As you can see from the diagram that I've got to the side of this slide, is that there is a very high percentage of appeals rejected. And this means that as a result, the Home Office support that people are offered is terminated. And this is called their NAS support, the National Asylum Seeker Support. And at this point, the individuals are left without accommodation. They're left without any financial support, and they're unable to work. Many are unable to return home. And just because their claim has been refused, it doesn't mean that the reason they fear isn't there. The persecution, the torture, the risk of death doesn't disappear. They still live in fear. And people are left in this situation in limbo for many, many years. And sometimes without the Home Office ever trying to issue removal proceedings. So this is just one group of people that our members work with. The other migrants that are at risk of destitution and have the no recourse condition that many of our members also work with are refugees. And this is when they've been given their refugee status or their leave, but don't have the documentation necessary to claim benefits or apply for housing. And it's a very short window from getting your positive decision to the point that you have to leave. And I think it used to be about 28 days, this may have changed, but that's around 4 weeks. And that's not a lot of time to get everything prepared. And often due to kind of the housing, lack of housing, it can be very difficult and can leave people at the point of being homeless. We also work with people that are trafficked into the UK for work or other reasons who have not yet been able to secure recognition of the status of a victim of trafficking. And we also work with people who've lost their documentation and so can't prove their right to access benefits. And then we have those whose leave includes the condition of no recourse, but who can't no longer support themselves because of a change in circumstances. So this could be people that have arrived here to work, they may have lost their job and can no longer seek further employment. And then we also have EEA nationals who haven't got their settled status. So what this means is that forced destitution is inhumane and is part of a hostile environment that the government are purposely rolling out. The no recourse condition harms and significantly impacts lives. It increases poverty and isolation. It causes a deterioration in physical and mental health. It leaves people open to the dangers of the risk of exploitation and forced labour. Often individuals become unseen, unheard and ignored. And it prevents people from being able to exercise their rights. What we know within Nacom is that with time and good advocacy support, the no recourse condition can be lifted. And if the diagram that I showed earlier, we know that around 40% of appeals can be overturned if there is good and adequate legal provision provided. We also know from experience is that when a person's basic needs of shelter and food are met, that they're better able to engage and be able to help to find a longer term route out of destitution, often going on to regularise their status. So this could be leave to remain and eventually settling into the community. Over to Paul.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So the Nacom network is very diverse and no two housing projects are the same. I'm going to go over a few examples where Nacom members are working with housing associations. Each project has the potential of either being replicated in other settings or of achieving a bigger impact with new or increased stock provision from housing associations. And what I'll say at the start is that each of these projects are not looking to just provide an alternative to Home Office provision. The aim of the projects is to house somebody to then either regularize their immigration status, or in the case of EU nationals, get them back into a position where they are work ready, able to access employment, and then be able to take home on their own tenancy. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Boaz Trust, one of the founder members of Nacom. It's been going since 2004. It's a cross-subsidy model. So a lot of Nacom members doing housing are cross-subsidizing. So they're receiving an income from one client group that allows them to provide beds for people with NRPF. In the case of Boaz, they only work with refugees and asylum seekers. They have 21 shared houses, 2 at least from Arawak Walton Housing Association, 4 from Green Pastures, and 15 from a variety of other supporters. And what's interesting about the relationship with between Arawak and Boaz is that Arawak haven't just made 2 houses available, but they have a contractual relationship with Boaz where they do all the housing management of the whole of Boaz's housing stock. So their own properties and the other properties which Boaz have access to are all managed by Arawak, who do all the repairs, the maintenance, emergency call out, and even do the rent collection for those with recourse. This allows Boaz staff to concentrate on what they do best, the wraparound support for both refugees and asylum seekers to achieve positive move on. The charity has links with various local legal providers, including the Greater Manchester Immigration Advice Unit, and over the past year have achieved positive move on, 11 positive move on, which includes further subs, Section 4, or leave to remain. Next one, Katie. Okay, the next one is Open Door North East, a charity close to my heart because I used to manage it. Slightly different model. It's a social lettings agency on Teesside, a mixed portfolio of properties that they own, some that are rent-free, and one from Homes for Cathy member North Star Endeavour. It's an interesting one because this relationship with North Star started through Open Door applying for a community enterprise grant to set up a social work project for women on Teesside. That led to a developing relationship with North Star over a period of a year. Sally Thomas, who many of you will know, is now the Chief Exec of the Scottish Housing Federation, was my contact at the time. And they discussed it as a board, realized that they could do this as part of their charitable good, and they made a 5-bedroom property available to Open Door North East at £1 a year. This is a property that was difficult to let due to bedroom tax. They didn't just make the property available, they converted it to an HMO, and that was done for free by one of their contractors. They have a scheme whereby external contractors working for the housing association do a certain amount of charitable work per year. So the house was completely renovated, redecorated. The only thing they didn't do is put carpets in, but I don't think housing associations tend to put carpets in, so that's another story. But so this property is used has been used for both refugees and NRPF asylum seekers as part of the cross-subsidy model. And Open Door North East has internal non-legal casework, but also works with local solicitors and a legal charity called Justice First, who are always level 2 registered. Next one, Katie. Okay, so Hope Projects in Birmingham. Hope Projects, another founder member of Nacom, and the one that's been working the longest with housing associations, not a cross-subsidy model, just housing people with NRPF. All properties they have access to are rent-free. some privately owned, but 6, interestingly, are from 4 different housing associations in Birmingham, 2 of which are homes for Cathy members. This was brokered by a Hope board member who worked for Bourneville Village Trust, and these relationships go back for 7 years. He was well connected with other local housing associations and negotiated the arrangements with all 4 of them. There's various levels of involvement from the particular housing associations in terms of the stock repairs and maintenance. Generally, the external works looked after by the housing association and the internals by Hope projects. Hope have internal legal provisions, so OIS level 2 and 3, intensive casework and move on plans for everyone. Good outcomes, 38 housed over the past year and 9 positive move ons, 2 achieving refugee status. Just a few other examples. A number of other NACCOM members have properties that are being made available from housing associations, they range from rent-free or below market rent. These tend to be houses let at what would have been a family rent, but the house is then converted into an HMO, which gives a higher yield. 2 members are working with Homes for Cathy members are doing specialist refugee move-on work, so that's Innisfree in London, and then there's another housing association in Bedford that's involved with resettlement work. One of our Welsh members is working with Pobble Housing Association to develop an exempt rent supported housing model in Newport, which has got bed provision for NRPF. And others in Wales. Wales has something called Deeds Not Words, which is a similar sort of commitment. And there's been quite a movement in Wales, in Cardiff, Swansea and Newport, where all our members in those areas are either have or about to have stock provided by local housing associations. Okay, a slightly different example. So this is a NACCOM member who is a housing association. So this is their own projects tackling people, making provision for people for NRPF. So a specialist project in Sheffield, this is Metropolitan Thames Valley, doing Section 21 Care Act work in Sheffield for people with NRPF. This is a contractual relationship with local authority in this case, but their own project in Derby, which is a 12-bed hostel and a 4-bed house, which is providing accommodation for a whole range of people with NRPF, from asylum right through to EU, with links to local solicitors doing work to regularize immigration status. Next one, Katie. Okay, just a final slide just to show where we are operating. So if you're a housing association on this call and you can see your town or city on this list, that means there's a NACCOM member there, and that means that we'd really like to talk to you. So we've got projects in almost every region of the UK who are doing housing of one form or another. And I've noticed that some of our members are actually on the call today. So thank you, and we're staying on at the end should you like to talk to KTI or have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie and Paul. That was really great overview of what you do, and I think it makes it clear that, you know, with just some, as you said, time and legal help, and with basic needs of housing and shelter met, then there is a chance that people can move on. So it can make a massive difference in what housing associations do to help this cohort. So as I said, as Paul said, please do hang around at the end and they can answer any questions you may have on what they do and the different types of models that work in this area. So before we move on to our speakers from South Yorkshire Housing Association, Phil Parks and Jochen Kortlander from their Partner Assist, I'm just going to attempt to play a video of one of their service users, Tendai. So hope this works, but we'll see. So is
2008, that's when things started to get bad. We couldn't work no more like we used to work. We started to suffer. You start to think, what's the point of living? Life just becomes unbearable, trust me.
Over 60% of applications for asylum in the UK are refused. Despite fleeing dangerous situations, applicants are not granted refugee status.
When you do application for the first time, because everybody is hoping that it's just going to go normal like everybody else. Like maybe after one try, you get your papers. Eventually, when you are refused twice second time, they don't even want to have anything to do with you. You become another one of those. You see, like they call us, one of those.
They have no right to work, no right to rent, and cannot claim benefits. This is part of the Home Office hostile environment policy, leaving people homeless and destitute. There are thousands of people living like this in the UK, their lives frozen in a state of limbo, often for many years. Those who are refused would often rather live in extreme poverty here than face persecution.
There's reasons why we come here. We don't just run away from our countries. They would force us, to go and eradicate people who are not like with the party. Recruited under the gun, literally. My heart just refused. My resistance that day to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I got hurt. So I had this guy with a gun, they've got bayonets in the front, poking me with a gun like here. That's why I got this injury here. These are very dangerous people. They make people disappear. From that day, then I knew, yeah, I'm in serious trouble. I went to assist. I was literally homeless, going suicidal, literally. No more friends, nobody picks your phone. It has to be like a healing process. You see, once you start to know that somebody cares about you, you start to heal, All these bad thoughts start to disappear. Everybody is entitled to have a decent life. Everybody needs to have a bath, a shower, a wash, cook. These things people might take for granted, but definitely a human being is a human being. I really pray every day that God helps us, and I'm worried that they get overwhelmed, you see, with the people that need support.
Assist is aiming to raise £8,500, enough to fund our vital accommodation services for 3 months over winter. Please like and share this video to spread awareness. If you would like to donate to the campaign, follow the link in the description.
So we can't hear you, Vicky. I think you want.
Oh, okay. Sorry, minor technical hitch there. In all the best Zoom workshops, there's always something. Okay, so great film, and I think that highlights the sort of trauma that people experience, in this situation. So I will now move on to our presenters from Assist and SYHA. I've got your presentation here to share. I see them. That's it. Right. Okay. So you can let me ask me when you want to move on through the presentation. But,
Thank you, Vicky. I'm probably going to do that Chris Whitty thing where I just say thanks, Vic, and move on. So apologies to everyone for that. First of all, probably just say thank you for inviting us. I'm Phil Parks from South Yorkshire Housing. My role is head of service, and I look after our supported housing assets. Jochen will talk about the work of Assist and the SYHA have been doing around migrant homelessness and our journey to fill in the void. So a slightly different angle to how we can use housing. It will be a double act. Vicky, if you want to move on. with starting with the why, and then moving on to the assist perspective. Jochen will provide, and then I'll provide very much a housing perspective. So for the housing associations out there, just the kind of the things we had to go through and think about, and then we just want to sum up with some learning and advice that we might think might help people. You'll have just seen from the slide before, my colleague Vic Sterling says, when you've got nowhere to call home, there is nowhere called home. So it seems like a really obvious thing, but actually it's really good to pull everything you're doing in partnership and working together back to why you're doing things. And that's why we're starting with the quote from Leon. It's not just about missing your family, and that's one element, but also that very much dependence on others when you potentially have never been dependent on anyone in the past, and that's quite a big thing for people to get their heads around. Thanks, Vic. Over to Jochen to tell a bit about Assist and the Fill in the Void project.
Yes, hi, morning everyone. Just want to say about the video, we weren't trying to make a sort of financial plug, just want to make that clear to anybody here. It's just that our speaker with lived experience wasn't available as we had hoped. So I remembered that we had this video, but we weren't able to sort of edit it for this purpose. But I think it gave sort of quite a good sort of idea and background of, you know, what the work is that we're doing and what the kind of issues are that Katie and Paul have already described in their presentation. So just a few words about Assist and our current work. So we are one of those NACCOM members that they spoke about in their presentation. In fact, we're one of the founding members. Assist itself as a charity was founded in 2003 in response to destitution of people who were refused asylum. So that's the time when that policy came into place. So we, like I suppose a lot, if not most, NACCOM projects sort of started off as being more of an initiative of volunteers who sort of got together and wanted to respond to those issues that I've mentioned. And that was really for a long time very much the ethos of Assist. We were volunteer run for, well, I think exclusively volunteer run for the first 5 or 6 years of our existence, and then went on a journey, involved more staff members as I think it became apparent that this situation wasn't going to go away anytime soon. I think it was recognized that we needed to be much more sort of organized and sort of constitute ourselves as a charity, with all everything that goes along with it, having kind of policies and procedures and everything that wasn't there when we first started off as a group of sort of active volunteers. And that's been a sort of a process and a journey that we've been on as an organization. I suspect many other organizations like us have been as well. In our case, that sort of culminated in us having our first executive director sort of just about 18 years into our existence, just about 6 months ago. So, but we still maintain a very strong ethos of involving volunteers, and I think I'll come back to that point once or twice in the next in the course of this presentation. And one of the things that helps us do is fund our services. So we've got a very strong local supporter base, large number of people who give individually and who do all the sort of fundraising activities that you'd expect, the marathons, the sponsored walks, dinner parties and all the rest of it. But we also receive quite a lot of grant funding, including at the moment from the lottery. So if we go to the next slide about our current work. So we have moved from initially providing very short-term emergency help to people to now having a more holistic and client-centered service model. We like to think of people who enter our service going through different phases of support, initially dealing with the shock often of being made destitute, of meeting those essential living needs, making sure people know where they can access food, which is actually a problem for quite a few people, to provide emergency accommodation and emergency sort of advice, to a period where we kind of work with somebody who, once they're in a slightly more stable situation, looking at the various options in terms of, where they can go with their asylum claim, or are there other options that they may have in order to regularize their status, and then to a period of helping them to move on from our service. So we set ourselves an aim to not work with one person for more than 3 years, but especially now with COVID, that has had implications for a lot of our clients. So we're sort of having to review that, and we're also providing some aftercare after those 3 years. But we're aiming to have a limited set of time during which we work with one person. So in sort of concrete terms, currently we provide financial support for technically up to 100 individuals. We haven't got quite that many at the moment, of up to £35 a week. We do non-legal casework, but also work with legal charities and solicitor firms who do legal aid work. We help people with signposting about sort of quality, broadly quality of life, help people access volunteering opportunities, English classes, sort of sports clubs and those sort of things. We provide accompanying and have got a team of volunteer interpreters for, I think, the most commonly spoken community languages. In terms of the accommodation, which is the area that I work on, we before COVID, we ran an emergency night shelter out of a church hall. We had and still have a hosting scheme, and we've currently got 9 houses where we house people while that's in the period of stability, and all of these have been staffed mainly with volunteers, as I was saying. So before COVID, we had around 200 active volunteers. The numbers sort of fluctuate a little bit. It's less now because obviously due to COVID, a few services, especially ones that were quite volunteer intensive, like the night shelter, haven't resumed operating. So I think the numbers are down quite a bit, but we still have a lot of people who sort of are involved in other ways and are following our work. And as I say, I'll come back to that in a moment when talking about Filling the Voids project. So if we could just go to the next slide. The Filling the Voids project is about offering short-term emergency accommodation to people who are newly destitute, and to provide an alternative to the night shelter provision that we had in place before COVID. And we're doing that by using vacant housing association, and in this case SYHA housing stock. So that is the basic sort of premise and idea that we came up with. Just a few words on how we came up with it. First of all, our night shelter has been sort of the one thing that our service users have asked us, over years to improve and to change. And it's easy to see why. I mean, we sort of offered that as a kind of a baseline support for people who would otherwise literally be sleeping on the streets, to sort of keep them safe from the elements, especially in winter. The shelter did actually run all year round, but there were issues with accessing it because we opened late at night. People had to be out quite early in the morning because the church hall was being used for other purposes during the day. So we also did see that in terms of kind of sort of mental health and stabilizing, the night shelter did little, to do that. That's been quite consistent feedback from service users over the years. We then had our initial contact with South Yorkshire Housing Association actually came through volunteering, which is why I was sort of so keen to mention that. I actually got into talking to one of our volunteers who turned out to be a co-director and on the leadership team of SYHA. And that's really where that particular relationship started. And we kind of thought, well, there should be ways in which we, could work together. And they sort of broke in the meeting with the chief executive, and really went from there. We then sort of invited, when we were recruiting trustees for our board, we were inviting people from the senior leadership team at SYHA to join us, because that's an experience that we were lacking on the board. And in fact, that same volunteer who was at our night shelter then became a trustee and is currently our interim chair of trustees. So that really helped to strengthen the relationship and to create that interface between our two organizations. The other impetus that's probably fairly obvious is for the project was COVID and the fact that we were not able to run the night shelter, and that's actually an issue that has affected, I think, most emergency night shelters that were using that sort of church hall communal space model. So there was a real sort of, as I say, service users have been saying it for years that they want they want things to improve, but really we now didn't have an alternative anymore because the night shelter clearly wasn't possible to run it in a COVID safe way. So if we just move on to the next slide, how we went about it before I hand back to Phil. So we obtained funding from the Crisis Homes for All program, and that really helped us with getting some additional capacity that we in Assist didn't have. I'm very much involved in day-to-day operations, and I'm the sort of at the time was one of two staff members dealing with accommodation. So there wasn't really the capacity to do all the sort of sitting down and doing that bit of strategic work. And so that's where the grant really helped. And we continued building the relationship with SYHA. I know Phil is going to talk a bit more about that, so I won't go into that much detail, and then really just working on the nuts and bolts. So again, we got through our massive pool of volunteers, we found somebody who had experience of our organization of Assist and who knew how we were ticking, Oliver, who is also on this call, but who's also had a background, professional background, decades of working in housing associations, and really knew the housing association sector inside out. And that was, again, through our volunteering, we're able to bring that in, and Oliver has been helping us as a sort of temporary, on a temporary basis, as a consultant to hammer out some of those things that I've listed here. So we came up with quite a detailed brief of the location, of the duration that we would need a property for, and how that would fit with our service model. So we looked at the compatibility of our respective tenancy agreements, or in our case, what we call them occupiers agreement. We looked at risk mitigation, legal aspects, financial and contractual issues, and eventually sort of agreed on the short-term use. So SYJ offered us several properties, and we sort of, by using the criteria that we'd drawn up, chose to go with a 5-bedroom house that had been standing empty for quite a while. Is that right, Phil? And that we are now using. We've just seen post-pandemic the Home Office resuming the policy of evicting people who've been refused asylum. So we have been able to offer emergency accommodation in that house as a short-term, so instead of referring people to the night shelter, using that 5-bedroom hostel. So the model is very much that it's a temporary accommodation where people stay while they are directly after losing their asylum, their NAS accommodation. And we then have a process of sort of working with them and directing them towards legal services, towards our own services, and also sort of coming up with a more detailed plan for them before we then move them into one of our long-term properties. And that's working really well. We've got 4 out of 5 bedrooms filled, and with the 5th probably going the rest of this week. We've been operating since this property since middle of July. And in terms of sort of the next stages is that we're sort of hoping to talk to SYJ, and we will be talking about how we're going to continue this and how we can upscale. I think if I just pass on over to you, Phil, now.
Thanks, Jochen. So we're a member of Homes for Cathy. I'll talk a little bit about SYHA, and then I'm really going to come at this from a housing perspective. So housing providers out there, kind of what we did and what it meant for us. For those people that don't know us, South Yorkshire is our bread and butter, 45-year history, but we've also got quite a large supported housing element, so 15,000 properties, and also we lease out about 400 dwellings for managing agents. So we've got a pretty good relationship with other agencies, and as you can see, Ashiana there as well in this space. So we've got some history of working in this, but because we'd signed up to the 9-point plan, I think it would be fair to say that this was the one area that we were really struggling to crack. Thanks, Vicky. So as Jochen described, it would be fair to say that we were introduced and through our co-director Julianne Hall, and as with the way with COVID, we did a lot of our dating online, so we got to know each other well. We began to trust each other. We kind of liked each other. I think we shared some of the sense of humour and the same values, and we thought, you know, why don't we crack on and give this a bit more time and see where we get to. Thanks, Vicky. And as with the way with many of these things from a housing perspective, timing's everything, and the name fill in the void gives it away to some degree. We just carried out an 18-month review of all our supported housing, and as other providers out there might be doing something similar around active asset management, and we've got some big extra care blocks, and then we've got some street properties, and then we've got this kind of mix of larger shared stuff in the middle, and we're trying to move away from larger shared to more housing first type models, and growing that as part of our commitment as well. So it left us some larger 5-6 bed shared properties, and we've got some decisions to make over, are we going to refurb these, are we going to reconfigure, or are we looking to dispose these properties. Thanks, Vicky. And as people will probably know, that even if you make a decision today, it takes a degree of time to go through your own governance structures, to convince people that either reconfiguration or disposal is the right idea, to get the money together to do anything around reconfiguration, to get it on the market, to sell properties, to speak to the Housing Corporation or Homes England. So time ticks on. And while that time's ticking on, you find yourself with security costs. So looking after the building and keeping it in good repair. Also coming to questions from the community over what's happening with that property next door, what's happening with the garden, what's happening with the windows, and also scrutiny under local authority, who acknowledge that there is a housing crisis out there. And the other thing to kind of note is that when you have void properties stood empty for a period of time, is that there's no eyes on them, or less eyes on them. So if you empty a property out, security grill and leave it, rarely do you have a programme of people going out to look at that property, and you find yourself with things like overflows that run, and you find yourself damaging the asset and lowering the value of the asset. So while time ticks on, things are happening to that property. Thanks, Vicky. So when we were approached by Assist, we thought, is there something we can do with this property? We literally lost some funding around this property. We'd done the review of this property. We realised it wasn't for us going forward, and we'd locked the door. But when we locked the door on this property, it had all its servicing up to date. It was already designated as a HMO. It had all repairs done on it. It had some furnishing in there, and it felt just a waste of an empty property while we decided what to do with it going forward. So working with Assist, we looked at a couple of properties, and we came up with this one in the city centre. I think it would be fair to say the first thing that we had to do was get our board to sign up to this, which relatively straightforward when you've got a director who also is chairing the charity you're working with. But actually, it was about getting that board on board. There is a financial impacts on the association, and it is a use of a social housing asset. So we needed board briefings and sign off for that reason. The thing that I thought was interesting is that just both sides can just bring very different expertise, but share the same vision. So Jochen and team have very much experience of night shelters, and this area of work that we didn't. We could bring the maintenance, repairs and asset side to the party, and also because we've got a number of management agents out there, we could bring things like a ready-made management agreement. We could talk about service level agreements and those things. I think it would be negligent of me not to mention some of the other practical things that we had to talk through in any good relationship on costs and risk sharing. So we got to a point where this property is nil rent, but we asked a contribution from Assist on the servicing elements for this property as well. So the utilities, and what we've done is, traditionally that would be a weekly service charge. What we've done is we've said we'll average that out over the 3 months, because we recognise that your fuel consumption is probably going to be less for the months that you're currently using that property as well. And as Jochen has described, this became a 5-bed shared property 5 minutes from the city centre. Thanks, Vic. Jochen.
Right, yes, I just want to wrap up, or we both have a few sort of learning points that we wanted to draw out. I hope you can hear me all right, because I'm having slight internet issues. So apologies if I do sort of freeze or whatever. I'll just whiz through these. So, I mean, one of the things that is, you know, what was interesting for us might be interesting for other NACCOM or other providers who've been sort of on a similar journey to us, was really what it brought home to me was how much expertise we've got in our volunteer core. So it's not just about having people who are sort of who work for free essentially, but also people who can sort of make contacts for you as an organization. And I think that probably came out, is what I was saying, in terms of the relationship that we then were able to build, but also in terms of the expertise that we had in the organization already. For us, it was really key to be able to step aside, to have extra capacity away from the day-to-day for somebody to could really take that on to have with the relevant expertise, and really to it's almost like an interpreting sometime sort of job. I think that Oliver has done or is still doing for us, you know, because he speaks both housing association and he speaks sort of asylum charity. So that was really useful to have somebody to bridge, you know, to bridge some of those gaps and help us communicate. I think having sort of very concise protocols around the types of properties we were looking for, that really helped us, and that really helped us formulate an ask of SYHA in terms of this is what we're looking for and this is what we're not looking for. That's both in terms of sort of the locations and in terms of the duration and the kind of purpose and layout, etc. We did quite a lot of work on sort of capturing everything that we did and all the different options that we sort of explored in an action plan. And that's for the purpose of being able to share that later on with others and also document how basically we came up with the project that as we came up with it. I thought that was a really helpful thing that we learned from this. Maintaining flexibility has been really key. I mean, everybody who's working in this sector knows that we spent months trying to second guess what the Home Office was going to do in terms of the evictions, because we didn't actually know at what point we would need the property. Because of course, for a long time during the pandemic, the Home Office wasn't evicting people onto the street, and really sort of just communicating that and having sort of the buy-in from South Yorkshire Housing Association, understanding that, you know, we couldn't definitely say from when we would need that support within the city, sort of through the city council and other stakeholders. And then lastly, just drawing back to what Katie and Paul was saying, just building on existing models and looking at what had already been done in other parts of the country. And I would also like to mention NACCOM's excellent housing toolkit in that respect. That was really, really valuable for us. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Vicky. Just move us on. Last one. I'll just quickly wrap up because I'm conscious of time. So the major things that I think we learned from a housing perspective: board buy-in, get everyone on board from the financials, but also the risk and the opportunities, and a real good chance to test those commitments as well. How committed are you to these pledges? We've started small just to see whether we're a good match and how we work together before looking to expand. Always acknowledge those hidden void costs. So if you have got a void there that you've locked, you've basically emptied, it's ready to go. It does cost you to keep that thing empty. So is there another use for it? There was some stuff we learned from Jochen. There is stuff we've learned from the team on managing assets as well. That's been really interesting for us as a housing provider, around house rules and those kind of things. And also key fact there that if you get the right partner looking after your property, they will protect it for you, whatever you're deciding to do going forward from that point. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Jochen, and thank you, Phil. I think that really did highlight what you said, the meeting of vision and expertise, which is so important, and also the board sign up, really, which comes a theme that comes up in a lot of our workshops, that it's so vital to have that, and I'm sure a lot of people on today from housing associations will have appreciated hearing the housing perspective, and it will resonate with you. So we did have a small break. We are running a bit behind, but I'm conscious that perhaps maybe people want to grab a coffee or visit the loo. So we'll just take a few minutes and then reconvene in about 3 minutes time. Hopefully that will give everyone enough time to grab a drink or whatever. Okay, and then we'll move on to another case study from the Oxfordshire homelessness movement.
So hi everyone, hope everyone's back. My name's Yvonne Pinner and I'm the project manager for Oxfordshire Homeless Movement. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our project to help those with no recourse to public funds. I have to dash off, unfortunately, because I'm in the middle of a team away day. But after I present, Eva from Connection Support is going to be presenting to you. That's one of our partners. And then there'll be a presentation from Jude from Soha Housing and Paul Roberts from Aspire, who are our other partners as well. So just a little bit about OHM, so Oxfordshire Homeless Movement. We've got a vision around everyone working together to ensure that nobody should have to sleep rough on the streets of Oxfordshire. And our aim is to sort of bring everyone together who is addressing homelessness across the county and shows people, interested people, the community, how and where to get involved. We focus on filling critical gaps in provision that others can't. And obviously one of the most important things is always listening to the voices of those with lived experience of homelessness. So that's our mission, which is working constructively together to increase public awareness and understanding of rough sleeping and homelessness more widely, to generate funding and commitment in kind, and to find and deliver effective, lasting solutions to end rough sleeping in Oxfordshire. So in terms of that sort of remit around filling critical gaps, we did some workshops, and one of the things that we found was that one of the critical gaps is housing and supporting people who have no recourse to public funds. And that obviously came to the fore during COVID with people in interim accommodation. So we've created a project to support people with no recourse to public funds, giving them an opportunity to find a home and rebuild their lives and live a full life. And we're working in partnership with 3 selected and specialist delivery partners, 2 of which are on the call, plus Soha Housing, who are the reason why we currently have any accommodation at all. So thank you to Soha. So it's to provide support and accommodation to the 20 people who are in interim accommodation venues who have no recourse to public funds, It's costed over a 5-year period with the aim to eventually take referrals. And the total cost of the project over that 5 years is between 1.24 and 1.48 million pounds, depending on the property supply and where that comes from. So we have a steering group. Oxfordshire Homeless Movement has a steering group, and we agreed this as a priority. And as I said, it was sort of speeded up by coronavirus. And the working group that we set up for this no recourse project includes members of the steering group who are asterisked there, of which Aspire and Connection Support are 2, and also non-steering group members, so that we could pull experience from sort of other areas, so the likes of sort of asylum welcome, refugee resource, sanctuary hosting, and so on. So the working group sort of worked on putting together a sort of full prospectus of the project and what it would look like and what it would aim to achieve. And there's actually a link there, which if you share this presentation, which you're more than welcome to do, you can go and have a look online if you haven't already. It includes this full costed solution. We also worked to create a specific strength-based assessment for guests, which took into account the fact that they have no recourse to public funds. We also gained input from our lived experience advisory forum. And then we carried out like a mini tender process, and we selected 3 delivery partners for the project. So Aspire, who are with us on the call today, Asylum Welcome, who aren't, but you can guess from their name what their specialist area is, and Connection Support, and Eva is on the call for us today. So Aspire are sort of in charge of the property management and maintenance services. Asylum Welcome look at sort of 2 separate cohorts, but so for the non-EA cohort, immigration and asylum casework to support access to and maximise effectiveness of legally aided help, and for the EEA cohort to support and regularise their status. And Connection Support is all around creating this sort of tailored support plan to sort of holistically care for the client's ongoing well-being and create a plan with the client to help them move forward successfully. So in terms of property planning, we talked to housing associations, and actually Soha Housing sit on our steering group and offered in our steering group to provide some sort of 2-bed properties, so affording us the opportunity to house 12 people at a peppercorn rent. And frankly, without their help, I don't know how we would have done what we've managed to do so far. And we were very aware that we didn't want to take properties from Soha that they could use for people who are on their sort of housing register. I don't know if that's the right term, Jude, actually, but you understand what I mean. And so it was agreed that in the main we would take 2-bedroom properties because they're the ones that were sticking. We've also talked to other housing associations. Perhaps Paul might touch on this, I don't know, later, but we've had less success with other housing associations. And we've also made some contact with colleges. Being a university city, you can imagine sort of how much property is owned by sort of the various colleges in Oxford. The costings do take into account, I'm sure Jude will be happy to hear, having to pay for some properties at more than that sort of peppercorn rent level, hence the difference between the 2 prices or costings I gave. And so sort of part of our role is obviously to fundraise in order to be able to house and support these people. So we use some of the fundraising monies that we managed to get through our Christmas 2020 campaign. We had one council who, through a very specific pot of money, was able to give us some funding, and also through local philanthropists, and we're obviously applying to trusts and foundations. And our current position is we're about £30,000 short of being able to support 12 people for 18 months. And obviously there are ongoing applications for further funds by Aspire, ourselves, and Connection Support. And so this is the latest update, which is Eva, this might even be, you know, you might have more information hot off the press, but we've got 13 clients being worked with. We've housed 9 guests, so 2 in Soha properties in Headington and 2 in Wallingford, another Soha property in Brightwell, Sutwell, Sotwell, sorry, and 4 guests remain in a temporary accommodation unit up until, I want to say, Friday, where 3 will move into a property, again, a Soha property in Littlemore, and 1 we're still working with, but we're confident we'll be able to move him somewhere so that he doesn't have to return to rough sleeping. And we're working with St Mungo's to establish the total number requiring accommodation when our 2nd interim accommodation closes, probably in mid-November. So that'll be our next challenge. And that was a very fast trot through where we're at. So I hope that wasn't too speedy, and I'm so sorry that I've got to rush off, but I've got a whole raft of people waiting to get into the room. So thanks ever so much for your time. Good luck with your presentations, Eva, Paul and Jude. And any questions, obviously send them to me afterwards, and feel free to contact me, give my contact details out. That's fine, Vicky.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne.
Okay, thank you ever so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks.
Thanks. I can share the link that Yvonne was talking about to the project overall post-meeting. So I think we're going to move on to Eva, who's going to talk about the support side via connection support.
Great.
Eva, are you there?
Yes, I am. Are you okay to share my presentation?
Yes, I can do that.
Brilliant, thank you.
It is here. Right, can everyone see that? Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's come through. Okay, well, thank you. It's good to be with you. My name's Eva, and I joined Connection Support earlier this year as the project manager for the NRPF project, which Yvonne has just given you an overview of. My role is to coordinate the day-to-day of that project and to manage our team of 3 part-time support workers. And I've been asked to share today a little about how we provide tailored support to our clients, some of the typical challenges that they face, and also our experience of interagency partnership working and how that's going. Just as a caveat, before I begin, we're still in the relatively early days of this project, and our primary focus to date has really been getting people in houses. The end of the Everyone In scheme put us under significant time pressure at the beginning to try and find properties. So really, we've had relatively limited time to sit down with the clients and have those more tailored discussions about the future and write individual support plans. That's going to be a significant focus for us in the next couple of months. But a lot of that work is still to come. So just with that caveat out there, let's have a look at how we are and how we intend to provide tailored support to our clients. And it's helpful to perhaps give an overview of the typical profile of our clients. They are at the moment all male. I'm sure we'll have more of a balance going forward, but at the moment we're only working with male clients. They are predominantly asylum seekers. The majority are from Iraq. We do have a mixture of nationalities, predominantly in their mid-20s. A smaller group who are a bit older, around the 50s, 60s. Most have been in the UK for several years. All bar 1 are not eligible to work rather. And typically single without any children or dependents. And then we have a small minority of EEA nationals as well. So how do we support these individuals? Well, the first time we meet with the clients, our support worker conducts a strengths-based needs assessment, as well as a risk assessment to ensure that we have detailed and relevant information on the client. So that assessment will typically cover the client's background, their living preferences. Do they have the right to work? Have they been rough sleeping? Where would they ideally like to live? Do they have health and well-being considerations? Are they working with other agencies already? And then on the back of those conversations, if they meet the criteria for this project, our first focus is housing. And the idea is that by housing them first before tailoring support plans, the individuals that we're working with have the necessary stability to have those conversations without accommodation-related anxiety. We housed a gentleman just last week in a 1-bed flat, and he shared with us just the other day how thankful he was for the flat and the impact it had had for him. In his words, he said that he had gone from broken to fully functional within a week. And I think that's a really powerful endorsement of the housing first approach. So once they're housed, our support workers begin to work with clients to create those individual tailored support plans and set goals. And we really strive for a client-led approach to ensure that they are the ones who are setting the goals, not us imposing our own. And those plans are tailored to cover all areas and be as holistic as possible. So it might be physical health as one goal, perhaps joining a football or tennis team. It might be connecting with a religious or community group or working on their English. And then further down the line, hopefully as they become eligible to receive public funds or regularize their status, we then work with them towards becoming self-sufficient. So perhaps looking for jobs, finding accommodation, applying for benefits. And throughout all of that process, our support workers are checking in regularly with the clients and touching base to see how they can help keep moving them forward. Several of our support workers have experience of no recourse themselves, and they can really draw from those experience. One of our staff just recently received refugee status himself. He's also from Iraq. And whilst he was applying for asylum, he seized every opportunity available to him, I think, and volunteered with several organisations, accessed every free course that he was able to. So he's really well placed to know how and where to signpost individuals to. And he's also really well placed to be genuinely empathetic to the reality of how hard it is to be living without recourse and to be waiting years and years for asylum. So, as I'm sure you all know, NRPF clients, they face a huge range of challenges. Many of them have already been mentioned, and really the list is much longer than this one here. Obviously, destitution and homelessness are huge challenges. So in addition to not being eligible to welfare benefits or public housing, people with NRPF typically are not permitted to work. From our experience, all of the clients we're working with have significant mental health challenges, compounded by being in limbo, waiting to hear about their status, whether or not they risk deportation. And we're working to help connect clients with local organisations such as Mind or a local refugee charity that offers therapeutic support specifically to those from a refugee background. And similarly, we refer clients to agencies to help support them through alcohol dependency, addictions such as Turning Point. Many of our clients are also vulnerable to exploitation, to forced labour, trafficking, being involved in the movement of drugs. And I'd say another challenge is that because this group has, I think, long been one of the hardest groups of people to help and need a high level of support, the supply just doesn't meet the demand. So we have a limited supply of housing services, and it's less than those who are eligible for it. We've got referrals coming in quicker than we can respond to. So we're having to make quite challenging decisions about how best to prioritise which clients to work with. Next slide, please, Vicky. Thank you. Given these challenges and the many more that I haven't listed just there, it's been really vital for us to be working as part of a significantly large network of agencies, each with its own unique area of specialism and resources. So this is just the result of 5 minutes brainstorming. There are many other organisations we're linking in with. It shows the necessary complexity of our network at the moment. We're trying to deliver a really high level of support, supporting individuals in housing, subsistence, immigration, physical, mental health. So we need access to this network across Oxfordshire. And we can do that because we're working in partnership with Syha and Asylum Welcome, and under Oxfordshire Homeless Movement, we're really benefiting from the wealth of each partner organisation's connections. for those of you who are interested in interagency working, you might like to see how we get on with this project in the years to come. As I've just mentioned, there are significant benefits. The primary one being each organisation plays to their strengths. They are doing what they are best placed to do. So combined, our support is far more holistic than one organisation could ever really hope to provide by themselves. And we've had several points in the project where we've already benefited from these different relationships, connections that each organisation has. For example, Yvonne at OHM, who you just heard speak, she managed to find a house for 5 people through Oxford University for us to use for a couple of months, just 48 hours before those 5 individuals would have become street homeless. So there are, of course, though, challenges to interagency working. Typically, the more people involved, the more complicated a project can become. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. So there's been a real need for clarity around exactly which responsibilities fall under each organisation. We've had a few teething issues in there, but I think we are getting there, and through regular meetings, we've been able to clarify those roles. Another challenge is that each organisation or agency, they have their own unique way of working, their own approaches and goals. So the joint goals of the projects need to be nailed down really tightly before it gets going. And any possible tension points need to be thoroughly hashed out in those initial discussions. And I know Yvonne just linked you to a prospectus there. I think that's amazing groundwork, really reflects how deep those initial discussions went for this project. So I can only give credit to those people involved at that point. But I've really benefited from being able to come in and start delivering a project that's been extremely well thought through. So that's an overview from me. As I said before, a lot of our work, particularly around tailored support for clients, is still to come. So if you would like to stay in touch, you're very welcome to contact me and pop the email address just there. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eva. That was an excellent overview of the particular set of challenges I think that this group faces, how sort of like a housing first approach really that's really tailored to them can make a difference, and also that sort of partnership approach and the need for clarity and communication with so many different partners working together. So we're going to hear from another one of those partners now on the housing element, which is Jude McCathery, who is from Soha Housing, and he's going to share how you work with Aspire as well, which does the housing management part of this particular project. So I'll hand over to you, Jude.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you, Eva. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Like others, I've been having a few internet issues this morning. Must be something that's spreading, but if you can't hear, just hold a hand up or something and I'll see what I can do. I'm speaking for Soha and Aspire this morning, and Paul from Aspire can't join us this morning, sadly. I know he was looking forward to it, but I'm going to do a one-man double act, so bear with me. This really is to talk about the process that Soha followed to join the project that we've been hearing about this morning in providing housing for people with no recourse to public funds, and under the Oxfordshire Homeless Movement umbrella there. And there we go. So I think the reason Soha became involved, we've sort of discussed this already really sort of earlier just now, but the Oxfordshire Homelessness Movement was already working in partnership with other agencies locally. Soha already have a link with the Oxfordshire Homelessness Movement through our Housing First work, and we have links with Aspire through our Housing First work, and we've got links with Connection Support through our work with tenants with mental health challenges as well. So these were already links that Soha had, and it made sense really for us to become part of this this project and build on those existing links. The partnership has been sort of mentioned, had raised funds already to support applicants with settling their immigration status, but also their day-to-day living. And it was obvious that if that money was going to be used to pay for rent, it was going to run out quickly. The project just wouldn't have the money to be able to support people longer term. So really we became involved, Soha became involved in the conversation, looking at solutions around that housing obstacle and how we could help and how we could support people. And something, from speaking to our local authority partners and speaking to other agencies, we became sort of, I suppose, quite aware of the legal limits in helping people with NRPF. And councils are obviously enough legally limited in providing housing. And we found that councils just couldn't really provide certain forms of assistance or help for immigration purposes. That could be homelessness assistance, it could be an allocation of either local authority or social housing, and it also just around not being able to assist people generally in that sort of support in finding secure housing. So we then realised that obviously we were going to have to sort of work in a way that was outside of our relationship with the local authority, with the full blessing of our local authority partners, but in a way that was quite sort of different to, I think, what we were used to doing. Certainly our Housing First project, we're used to working directly with the homelessness departments of local authorities and so on. So in seeking a solution and realising there was just no housing benefit available to help people in these situations, we realised that the Immigration Act only affects tenancies where rent is due. So actually, if we're not using a tenancy where rent is due, we're not doing anything to fall foul of the Immigration Act. So it quickly became clear to us the best way we could help was to allow the peppercorn use for a small number of our Soha homes. And that was what we started to investigate. And as I've put here, as luck would have it, Catherine Little, Director at Broadland Housing Association, had previously worked at Soha. So we've maintained good links with Catherine, and she was involved in a similar project out in Norfolk, and so we reached out to her to understand how they achieved this, and that was actually very helpful. We didn't have to reinvent any wheels. We were able to understand their sort of leasing arrangements with third parties, about how they'd managed to sort of discuss this with their local authority partners and weren't falling foul of any nomination agreements and so on, and that really helped us sort of hit the ground running with our own project. So really, with the obstacle being how we would grant a tenancy to someone with NRPF, because we ourselves are a public body, or in some senses are a public body, so we have to be careful around who we're granting tenancies for. The obvious solution was we just lease those homes, a small number of homes, half a dozen homes, to Aspire. As I say, an organisation we already know well, a charity we work with on a day-to-day basis, and we grant those leases at a peppercorn rent, and that means that Aspire can pick up those properties and then is able to grant licenses to people with NRPF, again at a peppercorn rate. And Aspire pick up the ongoing housing management there. We at Soha will do sort of major repairs and health and safety and so on, but on a day-to-day basis, Aspire are actually managing the housing and working closely with those tenants and making sure they settle in, and making sure that they're sort of moved in a settled and established way. And connection support, we've heard from Eva fantastically there, providing that ongoing support with settlement, with the tenancy too, and with just helping people put down those roots in that housing first approach, which I think has worked really well. We've been deliberately using multi-bedroom homes here because we think it maximises facility for the rent that we're sacrificing. We're conscious we're sacrificing the rent, the income for half a dozen properties there, so we wanted to make sure we were supporting the maximum number of people possible. And I think ultimately we just realised and decided this was the right thing to do. And we took this to our board for a decision. Obviously, as I said, we are sacrificing some rent there for properties. We had to get our boards okay on this, and our board again very much saw this as the right thing to do, and felt that the surplus we're making out of our 6,000 to 7,000 properties, there's no reason why we can't be using half a dozen properties in this way to support people who are otherwise destitute and at risk of returning to rough sleeping. It just very much felt like what we should be doing. We were conscious as well at the time we were having these conversations about the EU settlement scheme. We know there's still many thousands of EU citizens, EEA citizens, who are yet to register as UK citizens, and that will ultimately leave many of those at risk of NRPF. And that's something we were sort of conscious of in our own communities. We were looking to obviously prevent rough sleeping, following everyone in. We knew there was a high risk of people with no recourse to public funds going back to rough sleeping, following everyone in. So we wanted to make sure we could do our bit in helping to prevent that. So as I've said, we decided to provide 12 bed spaces in half a dozen homes. there's a case study here, and this is someone who's been through the project and the Everyone In project, and Farzad here was brought in from the streets where he'd been homeless and rough sleeping since 2006, so a very entrenched rough sleeper, having real problems, as you can imagine, without having any access to public funds, and just not able to put down roots and to have that secure home. And actually, one of the older gentlemen in the Everyone In cohort at the age of 60, and showing signs of premature memory loss, struggling with noise at night time, growing levels of depression and anxiety. And as he said, he was in limbo. He didn't have his immigration status, he couldn't work, he couldn't live independently, he just felt lost. And it was in a very dangerous and difficult situation in returning to the streets. And the project's been able to find supported accommodation for Farzad close to his social network. And his support workers built a really good support plan with him, and already is feeling much less anxious and now feels much better equipped to manage a tenancy and living independently and enjoying community life. And this is the difference that providing these homes makes. It's a very real difference, and it echoes what Eve was saying just a few minutes ago. It very quickly makes a positive impact for people. So finally, how can other providers help? Well, I think we've sort of talked about this already this morning, but I'm going to repeat it. Do you have empty homes waiting for demolition or redevelopment? Well, there's one area that we can help with. Do you have homes that are proving harder to let? For us, it was 2-bed flats, and we really found 2-bed flats were tough to let, especially during the lockdowns when people wanted gardens. So can you use those to support people? Have you got hostel rooms or other rooms that are just underused? Do you have a hardship fund that you allow non-tenants to access? We do at Soha, and that's been really helpful in helping people get the right things they need to make their home a home. And do you have links with charities and other agencies supporting people with no recourse to public funds already? Because if you've got those links, as I say, it really helped Soha hit the ground running. And that is the end of my slideshow. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jude. That was great. Also interesting again to hear about the board buy-in, and to the fact that you show there are ways to overcome the sort of legal limitations that could be perceived. I think hopefully the whole of today has given everyone a real whistle-stop tour of the plethora of models that can be put in place, and there's definitely more than one way to crack an egg here. It's just I think the will, and I think there are organisations like NACCOM who can provide that facilitation in terms of sort of linking people up with partners, because obviously we've seen how vital the meeting of sort of vision and expertise is across these case studies. So that sort of wraps up the session formally, but we will be able to hang around. I know that some people have had to dash off for other meetings, but we can hang around to answer questions if anyone has any burning questions that they would like to be answered. I think our speakers are happy to spend a few minutes. So yeah, has anyone got anything that they would like to ask? Please feel free to unmute yourself. All right, in the chat box. Nothing coming as yet. You can use the, I think we've got a raise hand function. I forgot about raise hand.
Can I ask something, Vicky?
Yes, of course you can.
Sorry, David Bogle of Hightown here. It's fantastic to hear about these great projects going on to house people with no recourse to public funds. I just wondered whether people thought that this situation was going to continue forever, or whether you think, looking at the big picture, whether there's any chance of persuading government to at least provide some way that people can be housed and pay rent. Or are we always going to be reliant on these kind of projects to house people with no recourse to public, house immigrants, I suppose, people fleeing violence and prejudice? Just wondered if there's something, I mean, maybe NACCOM could answer this, maybe. Is there anything happening at the political level to try and prevent this kind of project having to happen in the first place.
Got Paul or wonder if, or Katie.
Yes, there is. I mean, sadly to say that I don't think there is going to be much change, and I think the new Nationality and Borders Bill is only going to increase destitution. So I think the big thing that we're trying to push is a campaign to stop that bill, but to also, you know, make people aware of what it's going to cause and the effect it's going to have on people's lives. The no recourse condition is inhumane. Housing is a human right, and we should all be kind of upholding that within our values of our work. Paul, I mean, in terms of our other...
I'd just add that without end-to-end support, and by end-to-end support is somebody is kept within accommodation until the point of, you know, if they are going to be removed, and if there is a safe route home, then end-to-end support should be in place. We shouldn't have a situation where we force people onto the streets, and particularly where there is no safe route to remove people. So at the moment, as well as people coming in from Afghanistan on resettlement, on this resettlement project, there are a vast number of Afghans that are already here that have NRPF conditions. There are countries like Eritrea where we don't remove to, yet we force people into street homelessness. So this needs to change.
I think it's also highlighted, like I said in our talk, is that the inefficiencies of the Home Office and their decision making, that needs to be really kind of you know, fought, because that is where a lot of this is going wrong, and the lack of legal support. And we know that actually providing legal support is legal, and that is one route that we, you know, can end somebody's destitution. And that is what a lot of local authorities that we're hearing are trying to kind of look at within their response to preventing people from being homeless.
One of the big challenges for our members, you can start an accommodation project, but if you don't have access to legal advice, it's difficult to effect a move on plan. And as Katie alluded to earlier, the way in which the legal aid contracts are set up, there is very little money in the pot, and solicitors get paid for opening a file. Then that file can sit on the shelf, so they can have an income stream coming from opening files, but no work is done because they need evidence in order to you know, work on fresh claim. So what many of our members won't house people. So it's interesting to hear about the Oxford project, because that's quite unique and particularly well funded. I think I worked out for that project, it equates to about 70,000 per person per year, which is phenomenal. The majority of our members struggle to finance what they do, and will only take into housing people which have a chance of move on, a chance of that housing actually leading to a positive outcome, and which means they're often making really tough decisions about who to accommodate and who not, which is really hard.
Thank you, Katie and Paul. Hope that some way answered the question, or I don't know if there is an answer really. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to, burning question that they would like to ask any of our speakers? We've got a few minutes. Can't see them right now.
Hello, may I ask a question?
Of course, could you quickly
Ted Britton from Wydan. We operate an accommodation project in Leeds, and we are keen to find opportunity to link with somebody who could provide us with property in which we could run emergency accommodation to replace the night shelter we used to run. Do we know of any tame housing associations in the West Yorkshire area?
Good question. I can't off the top of my head remember if anyone was on this call from that particular area, but I think there are some bigger ones that maybe might extend to Leeds.
The only one I recognised that's operating in West Yorkshire was Sanctuary.
Yes, yeah.
But if anybody can find anything, we'd love to know.
Yeah, Vicky, I can't say the name because they're still in negotiations, but one of our members is currently in discussions with a Homes for Cathy member in that region about some stock release.
That's good news.
It is good.
There is a will there. Hopefully that's answered that to some extent. Okay, anyone else? Anyone else have anything that?
Yeah, my hand has been up. Can I?
Yes, hello. Would you
Hello, my name is.
Yeah, sorry.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Stanford BT from CAS. We are based in Southend-on-Sea. We now have about 40 nights a night, which have been supporting people with no recourse to public funding, including EU nationals. We now at a problem where most EU nationals are on their move on program. So we are going to remain with about 20 void rooms. One of the challenges which I've been having is taking anyone who is actually homeless from the homeless strategy in Southend-on-Sea, which would dilute us from our vision and the ethos of being a member of NACCOM, that we're trying to address destitution within the immigration system. We're also looking at working with a partner on releasing stock, but indeed the need is actually there. So it's working on a temporary accommodation where the local authority would actually tap into it. I've seen a good number of friends from our app and the things from our app, but the way we manage our housing in Southend, since Southend doesn't acknowledge that it's a dispersal area, it's totally different from what happens up north.
Sorry, can anyone add to that point?
I think it's an interesting point, because I think what you're saying is that in Southend, clearly people, there isn't that necessarily that will to provide the accommodation. It is just trying to find that partner who is willing to help and willing to provide accommodation. It's yeah, I think it's probably worth a conversation with Homes for Cathy members if there are any in the Southend area. Or certainly we could probably put you in touch with sort of the most local landlords, but unfortunately I think it's a challenge across the whole country currently.
Okay, well, thank you for all our speakers who've contributed today, and thank you for everyone who's attended. I've had some great comments in the chat on, you know, I think people have found it informative, and it's sparked some food for thought, definitely, for the future. So I'll be making all the slides available, and I will be sharing contact details if anyone wants to get in contact with any of the speakers. I hope that's okay. Who may be able to sort of answer some of your more detailed questions. So yes, all that leaves me to add is thanks everyone for coming, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you at future Homes for Cathy events.